How a secret U.S. Delta Force operation brought down Maduro.
America is once again at the center of a global power shift. Today, we examine how a covert U.S. Special Operations mission led to the detention of Venezuelan leader Nicolás Maduro deep inside one of the most heavily protected military zones in the country, while a massive air campaign unfolded above. But this operation didn't begin on the night helicopters crossed the coastline. It started months earlier. In late summer, U.S. intelligence quietly initiated what military planners call preparatory shaping. Small intelligence teams entered Venezuela under deep cover, building a precise behavioral profile of Maduro, tracking movements, habits, and locations down to specific time windows. Stealth surveillance platforms fed continuous real-time data, allowing analysts to predict where he would likely be on any given night. Over time, this intelligence narrowed his location to a fortified military installation south of Caracas, a complex carved into mountainous terrain designed to withstand both internal unrest and external attack. Then, in the early hours of January 3, 2026, the operation moved into its execution phase. At exactly 2 a.m. local time, coordinated strikes lit up key military and infrastructure targets across the capital. Missiles launched from offshore vessels and regional bases created confusion and paralysis. This was not random destruction, it was deliberate isolation. The ground component was assigned to Delta Force, supported by select federal law enforcement elements tasked with a live capture rather than a kill mission. Insertion tactics stunned observers. Helicopters launched from a U.S. naval assault ship positioned just beyond Venezuelan waters. Flying at extremely low altitude to avoid radar detection, the aircraft crossed the coastline and pushed inland under fire. One helicopter sustained damage but remained airborne. As explosions echoed through Caracas, the assault force reached the target compound. The base itself was formidable. Reinforced gates, elevated firing positions, hardened bunkers, and thousands of loyal troops assigned to its defense. Yet the defenders were already compromised. Weeks earlier, U.S. cyber units had penetrated national power systems. When the signal was triggered, electricity failed across the base and surrounding districts. Communications collapsed, coordination vanished. Operators moved fast. Guided by real-time intelligence from assets on the ground, the team advanced toward the residential structure where Maduro was believed to be sheltering. They anticipated resistance, sealed steel doors, reinforced safe rooms, and internal barriers. Breaching tools and explosives were prepared in advance. Above them, specialized helicopter gunships suppressed hostile fire, deploying advanced countermeasures against incoming missiles. Several launch attempts were neutralized mid-flight.
Inside the residence, the breach was successful.
Maduro was located, restrained, and removed alive, along with his wife, before being extracted to waiting aircraft offshore. The decision to capture rather than eliminate was deliberate. Anything else would have carried severe legal and geopolitical consequences. But extraction was only half the battle. As helicopters departed, U.S. air power intensified strikes against military assets nationwide. Fighter jets, bombers, and electronic warfare platforms neutralized air defenses, destroyed armored units, and prevented organized pursuit. Total air dominance was achieved through a campaign involving well over 100 aircraft. Within hours, the skies were effectively sealed. No American aircraft were lost. In the aftermath, questions emerged immediately. Who governs Venezuela now? Was this a forced capture or a negotiated exit disguised as force? And was the operation legal under international and U.S. law? Washington announced a temporary transitional authority backed not by occupation troops but by control of Venezuelan oil exports and maritime access. Resistance voices emerged, but mass public mobilization failed to materialize. Some Venezuelans celebrated. Others warned of foreign domination. Most waited, uncertain of what would come next.
One thing is clear. This was not just a raid. It was a message.
And that message didn't remain confined to Venezuela. Within hours, it rippled outward into intelligence briefings, emergency diplomatic calls, and closed-door meetings across the world. Governments that had long viewed Venezuela as a stalled crisis suddenly faced a new and uncomfortable reality. A sitting leader had been removed through a highly coordinated operation that suggested long-term preparation, not improvisation. In Washington, officials were careful with their words. There was no language of conquest, no declaration of victory. Instead, they spoke of accountability, criminal proceedings, and the need for an orderly transition. But outside official statements, the global interpretation was far more direct. The United States had demonstrated that it could act decisively, unilaterally, and with precision. Inside Venezuela, the atmosphere shifted quickly. Authoritarian systems rely heavily on the perception of control. When that perception fractures, uncertainty spreads faster than resistance. Government officials appeared on state television urging calm, while security forces increased their visibility. Yet beneath the surface, coordination was uneven. Orders overlapped. Communication systems struggled. Conflicting narratives emerged almost immediately. For ordinary Venezuelans, the response was not immediate celebration or rebellion. It was caution. Years of instability had conditioned the population to wait before reacting. People watched for practical signals: electricity, food prices, fuel availability, security in the streets. These indicators mattered far more than speeches or slogans. In some neighborhoods, daily life continued unchanged. In others, armed groups moved to assert their presence. In a few areas, quiet optimism surfaced. But overall, the country entered a holding pattern, suspended between fear and expectation. The central question became unavoidable. Who actually held power now? The acting government claimed authority, but in Venezuela, power has never rested solely in formal titles. Real control flows through the military, internal security services, energy infrastructure, ports, and financial channels. Those networks did not automatically realign with the removal of one individual. Military leadership emerged as the decisive variable. Some commanders moved quickly to secure key assets: oil facilities, refineries, airports, and ports. Others remained silent, waiting to see which direction events would take. A few disappeared entirely from public view, fueling speculation and distrust. At the same time, armed civilian groups, long embedded in local power structures, became an unpredictable force. Their loyalty was transactional, tied to resources and protection. In the absence of clear authority, they began prioritizing their own survival and influence. From the outside, Washington's strategy emphasized leverage over occupation. Control of airspace, maritime routes, oil exports, and financial pressure became the primary tools. The message was implicit but clear. Cooperation would open doors. Resistance would deepen isolation. Yet leverage alone does not guarantee stability. Economic uncertainty followed quickly. Currency pressure increased. Fuel distribution became uneven. Informal markets expanded. Control over energy and logistics became synonymous with political influence. International reactions varied sharply. Some governments condemned the operation as a violation of sovereignty. Others urged restraint while quietly reassessing their positions. Regional states prepared for potential instability, wary of migration flows and spillover effects. Meanwhile, Venezuela's opposition faced its own dilemma.
A leader removed through foreign action complicates domestic legitimacy. Some opposition figures embraced the moment as an opportunity for change. Others remained cautious, aware of the risks of backlash and internal division. Unity proved elusive.
Legal questions soon followed. Debates emerged over authorization, precedent, and international law. But within Venezuela, legality mattered less than outcomes. The population focused on whether life would improve or deteriorate.
Behind the scenes, negotiations quietly began.
Military leaders explored guarantees. Political figures sought protection. Business elites repositioned themselves. Intelligence officials assessed their exposure. These were not ideological discussions, but calculations driven by survival. And looming over all of it was Maduro himself. Alive and in custody, he became both a bargaining chip and a liability. His potential cooperation threatened to expose networks that extended far beyond Venezuela. His silence carried its own risks. His very existence complicated every political equation. Speculation intensified around the nature of the operation. Some questioned whether the limited resistance and clean extraction suggested prior arrangements. Others dismissed the idea as conspiracy, but the uncertainty itself proved destabilizing.
Inside Venezuela, suspicion spread rapidly.
Phones were seized, loyalties questioned, old rivalries resurfaced. Paranoia weakened cohesion, accelerating institutional decay. Trust, already scarce, became even harder to find.
At the same time, smaller resistance efforts attempted to provoke unrest, hoping images of chaos would force escalation or withdrawal. Social media amplified rumors faster than facts. Information became another contested battlefield.
Despite the tension, a nationwide uprising failed to materialize. Exhaustion outweighed anger. The population waited, watching closely to see which forces could actually govern. The operation had removed the leader, but it had not resolved the deeper crisis.
The gap between the old order and whatever would follow remained dangerously open. And in that gap, every decision, every delay, every misstep carried the potential to shape Venezuela's future in ways no single raid ever could.
The story, clearly, was far from over.
As the days passed, the absence of a clear center of gravity began to reshape behavior across the country. Local officials who once relied on centralized directives now made decisions independently, often contradicting one another. In some regions, security forces enforced strict controls. In others, enforcement loosened noticeably. The result was an uneven landscape where authority varied from street to street. This fragmentation carried risks. Where authority weakens, opportunism grows. Smuggling routes expanded. Black market fuel sales increased. Groups with access to weapons or logistics gained influence quickly.
For many Venezuelans, the concern was no longer abstract politics, but immediate stability, whether tomorrow would be safer or more dangerous than today. The military remained the critical hinge. A unified command could still stabilize the situation, but unity requires confidence in the future. Officers began quietly assessing whether cooperation with a transition would protect their ranks or expose them. Promotions stalled. Transfers were delayed. Silence became a strategy. Externally, pressure continued to mount. Economic signals were carefully calibrated. Sanctions relief was discussed, but always conditionally. The message remained consistent. Tangible improvements would follow demonstrable progress toward order and reform. Yet for citizens living day to day, conditional promises felt distant. Public patience thinned. Not because people demanded immediate transformation, but because uncertainty drained societies faster than hardship. Venezuelans had endured scarcity before. What they feared most now was unpredictability.
Information, meanwhile, fractured further. Official broadcasts insisted on sovereignty and resilience. Opposition voices spoke of opportunity and renewal. Foreign media debated legality and precedent. Social platforms mixed fragments of truth with speculation, producing a fog that obscured reality rather than clarifying it. In this environment, perception became power. Whoever appeared most capable of restoring normalcy gained credibility.
Not ideologically, but practically, stability, not rhetoric, was the currency of trust. Humanitarian organizations attempted to expand operations, but access depended on local cooperation. Aid convoys required protection. Distribution demanded coordination. Even relief became entangled in political calculations. Behind closed doors, elite bargaining intensified. Agreements were discussed, revised, abandoned, and revisited. Lines were drawn, erased, and redrawn. Everyone understood that the next arrangement might not last, but any arrangement was better than none. And still, the question of legitimacy hovered over every decision. Could a transition born from external force be embraced internally? Could accountability be pursued without triggering revenge? Could institutions be rebuilt without collapsing entirely? History offered no easy answers. Some transitions stabilize quickly, others fracture violently. Most fall somewhere in between, shaped by countless small choices rather than a single decisive moment. What had begun as a precision operation now unfolded as a prolonged test of governance. International attention remained intense, but attention does not equal control. External actors could influence outcomes, but they could not dictate them fully. Venezuela's future would ultimately be determined by those who remained inside its borders, by how power aligned, fractured, or reconciled. For ordinary citizens, daily life remained the measure. Was fuel available? Were stores stocked? Were streets safe at night? Were wages holding value? These questions quietly outweighed all others. As uncertainty persisted, migration pressures resurfaced. Families debated leaving or staying. Borders became points of tension. Neighboring countries watched closely, wary of sudden shifts. And still, no single faction moved decisively enough to claim dominance. The old system had been disrupted, but the new one had not yet formed. Venezuela existed in a narrow corridor between collapse and consolidation. In that corridor, timing mattered. Too much pressure could shatter fragile structures. Too little could allow old networks to reassert themselves. Every external signal, every internal response, carried disproportionate weight. The operation that removed a leader had succeeded tactically. Strategically, its consequences were still unfolding. And as Venezuela stood at this uncertain crossroads, one reality became increasingly clear. Power, once disrupted, rarely returns to its previous shape. It reorganizes. The only question was how, and at what cost. And for now, that answer remained unresolved.
As the transition stretched on, a subtler transformation began to take shape, one that was harder to measure, yet deeply consequential. Trust, already fragile, became transactional. People no longer asked who was right or wrong. They asked who could deliver. Local leaders gained influence not through ideology, but through reliability. A functioning generator, a protected food convoy, a reopened clinic. These actions carried more weight than any declaration. The security environment reflected this shift. In areas where local commanders coordinated effectively with civilian authorities, tensions eased. Where coordination failed, anxiety rose. Checkpoints appeared and disappeared. Uniforms changed hands. Symbols of authority blurred.
The state's outline softened, replaced by overlapping zones of control. This ambiguity favored those who understood systems rather than slogans. Former bureaucrats with institutional memory resurfaced as quiet intermediaries. Logistics specialists, long sidelined, became indispensable. Technocrats, rarely celebrated in moments of upheaval, found themselves in demand. tasked with keeping basic systems running while politics stalled. Yet every functional workaround carried a risk. Temporary solutions can become permanent if uncertainty lingers. Informal power structures, once normalized, resist dissolution. What begins as necessity can harden into precedent. Externally, patience was tested.
International partners debated how long to adjusting their posture. Too soon, and they risked empowering instability. Too late, and they risked irrelevance. Statements grew more cautious. Timelines softened. Expectations recalibrated. Economic pressure remained a double-edged sword. Easing it prematurely could strengthen unreformed networks. Maintaining it too long could deepen public suffering and erode goodwill. Each adjustment required precision, yet precision was difficult in a fluid environment. Inside Venezuela, the population adapted as it always had. People recalculated routes, suppliers, routines. Communities leaned inward. Mutual aid networks expanded quietly.
Survival strategies refined themselves, not dramatically, but steadily. The absence of dramatic confrontation did not mean peace. It meant waiting. Waiting for a decisive shift. Waiting for clarity. Waiting for someone to prove they could govern. Political actors sensed this hesitation and responded in different ways. Some pushed for rapid institutional reform, hoping momentum would solidify authority. Others advocated caution, fearing backlash. A few attempted to provoke confrontation, believing crisis would accelerate resolution. Most hedged, conserving influence rather than spending it. The military's posture remained deliberately opaque. Public unity masked private debate. Officers weighed loyalty against liability. History loomed large. Past purges, broken promises, forgotten guarantees. No one wanted to choose incorrectly. This internal deliberation slowed everything. Decisions delayed. Orders softened. Initiative stalled. But paralysis, too, has consequences. Vacuums invite pressure, from within and without. Information warfare intensified. Narratives competed aggressively. Each side sought to define reality before reality could define itself. Videos circulated. Leaks appeared. Counterleaks followed. Truth became less important than timing. For citizens, this noise reinforced caution. Few trusted any single source. Experience had taught them that certainty often preceded disappointment. Humanitarian conditions hovered at a precarious equilibrium.
Not collapse, but not recovery. Aid reached some areas efficiently. Others remained underserved. Disparities widened. Where the assistance arrived, gratitude mixed with suspicion. Where it didn't, resentment grew. The transition's success increasingly depended on coordination rather than control. Top-down authority was insufficient. Bottom-up legitimacy was incomplete. Bridging the two required patience, compromise, and competence, qualities often in short supply during upheaval. And still, the shadow of the initial operation lingered. It shaped every calculation, every rumor, every negotiation. The demonstration of external power remained an unspoken reference point. No actor could ignore it, yet no actor could rely on it fully. This created a delicate balance. Too much reliance on foreign backing risked domestic rejection. Too much defiance risked isolation. Navigating between the two required finesse. As weeks passed, a quiet realization spread among those watching closely. The transition would not be resolved by a single announcement, election, or agreement. It would be resolved or unraveled incrementally. By which systems stabilized first, by which alliances held, by which institutions adapted, by whether the population felt less fear tomorrow than today. These metrics did not trend neatly. They fluctuated. A week of calm could be followed by a day of tension. Progress in one sector could be offset by regression in another.
The path forward bent, corrected, and bent again. This uncertainty frustrated observers seeking clear narratives. But transitions rarely conform to clean storylines. They unfold unevenly, shaped by contingency as much as design. Venezuela's future remained open, neither secured nor lost, and in that openness lay both possibility and danger. The operation that began it all had shifted the landscape. What emerged from that shift would depend not on force, but on endurance, political, institutional, and social. For now, the country continued to move forward without resolution, suspended between what it had been and what it might become. And the question that mattered most remained unanswered.